Now, how to create a valid self. Here are some of the questions. Let's do with some bad examples first. So don't get these in your head. So, how do you feel? Ooh, yikes. That's a bad question. That is loaded. How do I feel? Well, depending on how I'm feeling, I might answer that question different too. I mean, I'm angry. I'm ticked off. Why are you asking me this stupid question, right? Also, something might just happen to you that's throwing the question on. What does that mean? It's so subjective, meaning it's so up to the person. You need something much more scientific, much more mathematical, something like a scale. How would you rate your anxiety on a scale of 1 to 10? That's a much better question, right? Okay, are you anxious? Yeah. Everybody's anxious. Okay. How would you rate your anxiety on a scale of 10? Okay, that's giving me a metrics, which is a mathematical rating system that I can kind of picture in my head. My anxiety is around a 5 right now, just average. And then we ask you the same question right before you take a test. My anxiety is at an 8 right now. Why is it at an 8? About to take a test. Okay, all right. So now we have some kind of metrics. And we might have to explain the metrics to the people, like, okay, is your anxiety at, like, what would you say your anxiety is at when you have a test? I'd say a 9. What is your anxiety at if you're up to bat as a baseball player on the team? It's probably at a 7. What about if it's a playoff game? Oh, it's a 10. If we're in the playoffs, it's a 10, and you see that. Baseball players and hockey players and football players and basketball players, they all stress out. Their anxiety goes up. That can be good and bad. So here are some type questions. You clear questions that are not too long or short, not too many questions. Don't ask them a million questions. Why? What are most people going to do if you ask them a million questions? Right. They're going to throw the survey out. They're going to ditch it. And that's not good. You want them to actually do it. So I've read numbers maybe around 20, 40 questions. 20 is kind of pushing it. You start going past 20, people get tired of something. Questions should not be leading. Now, this is important. And this is a very important concept. Lawyers will do this on purpose. They will lead the person when they're asking questions to try to get them to say the answer they want. Well, in court, that's allowed. However, if we're doing a scientific survey, we do not want to lead people. So, for example, you like this class, don't you? If the teacher asks you that, that's leading. They're telling you to answer it the way they want. And of course, the teacher wants you to answer the question. Oh, I love this class. So you like it, don't you? Like implying that if you don't answer it the right way, you're going to get in trouble or it could hurt your grade or I'm going to call your mom. So no leading questions. Like that's as a teacher, it's hard to do. As when we ask you guys questions in class, we're trying not to give you the answers. However, sometimes we have to start leading you a little to get you to say the answer to help you out. But that's very dangerous in psychology because you could basically convince somebody, and we saw that there's been research that people have been convinced they committed crimes with psychologists, or they've convinced that they had memories of something that didn't actually happen, and that was by using leading questions. So in psychology, we definitely don't want to use leading questions. No names associated with subjects or they're anonymous participants. Don't ask for names. As soon as you put somebody's name on it, the whole gig changes. It's over. And everything changes. Don't do that. You say, look, we're not going to ask your name. Now, you might have to ask them things like their age, because you need that data on the form, or their race, or, what culture what religion they are, stuff like that, depending on what we're questioning about. If we're asking Catholic people about how they view abortion, are most in favor or against it, well, we definitely need the information. We don't need their names, though. Also, we couldn't release those names anyway. That would be unethical. If we're psychological researchers or you're any kind of researcher, you can't release scientific research people's names unless you get their approval. So you have to be very careful with that. And you don't want to do it because if once people say, oh, it's Mr. Metropolis, I'm going to answer the questions differently. A lot of people are going to answer questions differently. They're not going to tell Mr. Metropolis what they think of his class. Some might, but most people are probably going to be, yeah, it's a great class. Because I don't want Mr. Metropolis to know. What if I take another class with Mr. Metropolis, right? Or the other way. Oh, I want him to think I really like this class so that he gives me a good grade at the end of the semester. Yeah, I love this class. You're the best teacher ever. By the way, can I get a boost from an 89 to a 90 and get an A in this class? Okay, so that's bringing bias. Questions that are given are clear options. So you have to sometimes have multiple choice. You have to have metrics like a 1 to 10 scale. Or you have to have strongly agree, strongly disagree. Things like that. Clear wording so people understand what you're asking. Don't ask, how do you feel? You like this class, right? Hey, what do you think about those Cardinals, right? Or let's go St. Louis. You like the Cardinals, don't you? That's my favorite team, the Blues. Okay, you can't do that stuff. Or and that way you get more honest and accurate answers. Now, what types of studies are there? Well, we've talked about the first one quite a bit, a longitudinal study. And the longitudinal study we talked about, researchers conduct several observations of the same subject over a long period of time, sometimes lasting many years. And the very, very famous longitudinal study we read about was the Harvard experiment on people that started at 19, 18, or 19, their sophomore year in college at Harvard. And John F. Kennedy was one of those guys, and followed them to the end of their life. Unfortunately, John F. Kennedy died, so we only know what he thought up until he died in his 40s. But then we interviewed people that went all the way. They made it to a long life, and what made them happy, and that's why strong, positive relationships with family and friends were above all. They loved their family, and they were close to their family and friends, and that's what happiness, the one thing that stood out in these research about happiness, they lived longer, and they were healthier. And the study even showed that people that smoked, but they had really close family and friends, they lived much longer than people that didn't have those strong relationships and they didn't smoke. Because loneliness is deadly, might even be deadlier than smoking, which is really crazy to even think about. Now, a cross-sectional study can compare different populations of group at a single point in time. Most polls are cross-sectional. It's expensive to do a longitudinal study on a poll. People, too, psychologists do more cross-sectional. So when we did the money incentives, and they did the study to see if we gave $50 a month to the kids, most kids raised their grades at least up to a C. Well, if you're doing a cross-sectional study, you should be able to do it not just at Chicago Heights High School, but maybe you need to go to a nice area like New Trier, which is a really expensive area. Or in St. Louis, you go to Ladue, and one of the wealthiest areas in the state, actually 19th wealthiest in the country, and ask them, those kids, would $50 do the same? That's an interesting question. Or on the other end, you might do kids in an area that's more struggling, like a poor area, like in the city, for example. Or you do more middle-class areas like parts of North County or South County. And then West County, so you need to look at all these factors. But you could do it at the same time. But you would stay on all freshmen. We want to see what all freshmen do if you offer them $50. But also, you need to probably get outside of St. Louis. You need to do Chicago. You need to do New York. You need to do LA. You need to do all over. You also need to do country or rural areas. Does that affect things? Does where you live affect things? These are all good questions. Now, what's the gold standard for research? This is very, very important. The first type approach is what's called a single-sided blind study. This means that the patients are actually blind. They don't know what's happening in the trial. And this is easier to show you guys when I talk about medicine. So if I'm a nurse, I give the medicine. I know I'm giving this person the actual antibiotic, and then or the COVID shot is a good example. I gave people the COVID shot, but I knew this is the COVID shot. And then we do what's called a placebo or a fake shot. And then I give other people, basically, I just put some not plasma, but some liquid in them. Some saline, which is just water that would just basically hydrate you. So and I know who I'm giving what to. That would be an example of a single blind study because I'm the nurse or the doctor doing it. Now, that is not the gold standard though, because even then I have a bias, or I might give clues to them. I might say, you think this shot's working? Yeah, okay, it is. And I'm kind of acting like, wait, did you not give me the real shot? I didn't say that. See, doctors and nurses, even the most well-educated people still have bias, so they might come out. Now, that's why the gold standard is the double-blind study, and this is more expensive, but much more effective. Neither the researcher nor the person being studied actually knows if they're getting the placebo or the real stuff. So a gold standard in the COVID, and that's actually why the first COVID research was seen as pretty solid. It was done on enough people. It was double-sided, meaning the people that gave it to them had no idea. The people that were taking had no idea if they're getting the placebo or they were given the placebo. Nobody knew. The only ones that knew were the people that had the packets and the information behind the scenes, and they would not tell or say anything. They're not supposed to, at least, tell or say anything to the doctors or nurses that actually gave the shots to the people. So we're really thinking that the nurses, doctors, and the patients had no idea who was getting the shot. And then we looked at the data. 6 months later, how many people had died? How many of those had the COVID shots, vaccines? And guess what? The people who had the COVID vaccines were hardly dying compared to the people that didn't. And the research was so good, everybody got excited. Now, remember, with science and psychology and social science, we want it to be reproducible, which means the British scientists are not going to trust American companies to test the COVID shot. They're going to test it themselves, and they want to look at the data. So the Japanese and all these other scientists are going to check this, and they'll be like, yeah, actually, they followed the gold standard. This is good stuff. And we should do it ourselves and see what happens. And if it's reproducible, you got something. We got a vaccine that actually works to help people. Now, this is a big questionable experiment. The Stanley Milgram's experiment we've looked at on how obedience convinced participants they were shocking or hurting people. There were some problems with this. Some people said there's ethical issues. For example, in order to create an ethical experiment today, we should, and this is some things that we've gotten out of this, honor confidentiality or keep participants' results a named secret. Don't do that. You can't talk about the study without the participants' approval. So if you do a psychology experiment on someone, don't ever tell anybody else about it, especially their name. That's why I worked at the psychiatric ward. I can't even tell you anybody's name because those people have confidentiality privileges, and they might not want somebody to know they were in a psychiatric ward. People have biased and prejudice against mental health. You have to have a debriefing. They did do that. It's explained why the subjects participated, the purpose of the experiment. So they sat down with these, first it was guys, and they said, look, you didn't really hurt somebody. And that made them feel terrible. We weren't doing an experiment on learning. We were actually doing the experiment on obedience to see how far people would go. And then finally, should experiments be painless, even stressful, or physical painless? These are big questions because we do psychological answers on animals, and animals have died doing behaviorist experiments. Like pigs have starved themselves. Birds and rats have been killed over these experiments, and a lot of people say that's too far. How much stress are we allowed to put on people? At one side, stress is not necessarily a bad thing. Too much stress is, though. We know it creates a lot of problems, and it increases your cortisol, which is your stress hormones, and it can cause maybe mental damage a long time.